What's the difference between a $4 knife, a $50 to $100 knife, a $1 to $2, $2 to $3, and a $400 knife? As you can see, all 5 of them are razor sharp straight out of the box. But at the end of this video, after using the knives for a series of tests and going a bit into the science behind their strengths and weaknesses, we'll find out which of these can still pass the paper test. I put together these 4 tests to highlight the 4 things that I think are most important when buying a new knife. And as a bonus, these 4 tests will answer the 4 most common questions that I get about knives. First, why do some knives go dull way faster than others? What features besides sharpness actually make a difference? What are the differences between stainless steel, carbon steel, and Damascus steel? And what's the difference between Western and Eastern style chef's knives? And at the end of this video, with all of those questions answered, hopefully you'll be able to answer the most important question: which knife is best for you? Now, before jumping straight into test number 1, I do want to give some context for this video by telling a quick 1-minute true story. Start the clock. Back when I was just a weird little kid who asked Santa for knives for Christmas, I saw an infomercial for the Miracle Blade 3 Perfection series, and I just had to have it. For just one easy payment, you got 11 different knives that could cut through food, or tin cans, or drywall. And because Santa bought mine in the next 15 minutes, it came with not 1, but 2 serrated bread slicers. Now let's get one thing perfectly straight. No matter where you are in your cooking journey, unless you're a professional bread slicer, you don't need 2 bread knives. And truth be told, I didn't need most of the other knives in that set either, because for 99.9% of my chopping, slicing, and dicing, I would always reach for the Rock and Chop, which was the Miracle Blade's version of a classic chef's knife. Now, the moral of the story is that rather than bring me an entire set of knives that I wasn't really gonna use, Santa would have been much better off investing in one high-quality chef's knife. I recognize the irony of sitting in front of this many chef knives talking about only buying one, but this is a knife video and we're gonna put specialty knives to the side and focus on chef's knives. Starting with the first test and everyone's least favorite thing to cut, onions. Most people hate cutting onions because they make you cry, the technique to cutting them is kind of awkward, and they have layers that slide apart, leaving you at best with oddly shaped pieces and at worst with a sliced finger. But a sharp knife will help you fix all of these. First, it's counterintuitive, but a sharp knife is actually much safer than a dull one. That's because when the knife responds smoothly to pressure, it's much easier to control the direction and the speed of the blade, making cuts like this way more predictable and therefore safer. It helps with tears too, because when cutting onions with a sharp knife, the onion cells will split smoothly and spill their juice out onto the cutting board, rather than bursting into the air like they do with a dull knife. So a sharp knife helps you cry less. I say cry less because sadly there's no way to stop crying while cutting onions.
Well, there is one way.
But besides that, anyone who says they know the secret hack is, well, a hack. Now to answer the question, why do some knives go dull way faster than others? Let's take a look at the $4 knife after cutting just one onion. The $4 knife has already lost its fine edge, but the other knives are still razor sharp. Well, it turns out the same thing that makes a knife easy to produce and cheap to sell is going to be the same thing that makes it quick to dull, and that is soft steel. Softer steel can easily be stamped or laser cut out of a larger sheet of metal to make a knife. It's a much faster process than forging, so inherently the knife is going to be more affordable. The softer material is also going to be easier to sharpen. Think about the process of sharpening plastic versus sharpening metal. The softer the steel, the easier it is to produce and also destroy a sharp edge. So when you're buying a knife, the hardness of the metal is going to be given on the Hardness Rockwell C scale as an HRC value. If the knife seller doesn't give an HRC, like with this $4 knife, it's not a good sign. We will talk a bit more about hardness in test number 3, but for now the big takeaways are hardness is measured as an HRC. The higher the HRC, the harder the knife, and the harder the knife, the longer it will maintain a sharp edge. Hey there, Editor Trig here. So one more thing I do want to mention is that a harder knife is going to be more brittle. So that makes it easier to chip if you're cutting something hard like a bone, or if the knife happens to fall and hit something. So use a softer steel or a cleaver, something designed for bone if you're going to cut something hard like a bone, and try to not drop your knife whether it's hard or soft. With that, let's move on to test number 2 and talk about which features, besides sharpness, actually make a difference. In addition to hardness, the performance of a knife is going to depend a lot on the process of heat treatment and the edge geometry of the blade. In my opinion, while those are still important, they're a bit less important than hardness and also just hard to actually pin down if you're not buying the knife in person and testing it or know the manufacturer personally. But one thing I do find super important is how the knife's handle fits into your hand. Obviously, buying in person is best for this, but you actually can tell a lot from a photo if you know what you're looking for in a handle. So to learn more about handles and talk about what features you may want to look for, let's do an endurance test. If you've ever spent 20 minutes finely dicing something hard like a carrot and ended up with that painful knife line on your hands, you'll understand why this test is important. To highlight this difference, let's look at these two knives that are made of the exact same German stainless steel. But one knife was stamped out of a larger piece of metal like the $4 knife, and the other was individually forged. The production process, whether a knife is laser cut, stamped, or forged, doesn't directly affect the hardness. Because these knives are made of the same steel, they have the same hardness and perform pretty similarly side by side. But one big advantage of a knife being forged is that the knife maker can give the knife a thicker spine and a more comfortable handle. This knife, for example, has a smooth transition from the spine to the handle, which gives you a wider and more comfortable point of contact where your hand meets the blade. Public service announcement. If you're trying to hurt someone, grab the knife like this. It's great for daggers, swords, or axes. But if you're trying to keep everyone safe, grab the knife here like this. This is called a pinch grip, and when you're holding the knife like this and cutting something hard and round, like a carrot, the knife will rotate with your hand rather than in your hand. Now, I know that it's natural and most beginning cooks will just instinctively go to a dagger grip, and some knife companies have specifically designed their handles to be more comfortable in a dagger grip. But if your hand and wrist hurt after just a few minutes of cutting and you want more control with your knife skills, try switching over to a pinch grip and look for a knife that was forged or has a thick spine and ergonomically designed handle that was made with that pinch grip position in mind. So the takeaways for test number 2. Besides looking at sharpness in a knife, a handle that fits your hand and the way you use a knife is going to be much more comfortable. Because of the extra effort that goes into designing a forged knife or a knife with a comfortable handle, they'll typically cost more. And lastly, for the easiest, most comfortable, and safest way to cut, try using a pinch grip. Now, test number 3. Would this even be a knife video if we didn't cut some tomatoes? You see this in every knife ad ever, including the Miracle Blade Perfection series. Because if your knife isn't super sharp, it'll crush the delicate tomato rather than making smooth, clean slices. But this isn't a test about cutting tomatoes smoothly. All of these knives are more than capable of that. I want to use the tomato test to answer the question, what is the difference between stainless steel, carbon steel, and Damascus steel? To enhance specific characteristics of a metal, you add certain elements during the manufacturing process to make a new alloy. Different alloys, like stainless steel, are made by adding chromium to optimize them for cleaning and care. Other alloys, like carbon steel, are made by adding carbon to optimize for hardness. These are also called high carbon steel because steel is already an alloy of carbon and iron. There are lots, and I mean lots of videos online that go deep down the rabbit hole of alloys. Trust me. I've been there. But I've found that the two main alloys you'll come across and the spectrum that they create are the softer, more easy to maintain stainless steel on one side and the harder, more reactive carbon steel on the other. The pros to carbon steel should be obvious at this point in the video because the harder the steel, the longer it maintains a sharp edge. And the pros for stainless steel are just as obvious. They stain less than carbon steel. Because as you add carbon to an alloy to make it harder, it becomes more reactive to acidic foods like pineapples, lemons, or tomatoes. Unlike the softer stainless steel that you can neglect, like expiration dates, cleaning under the couch, or flossing, you actually have to take care of carbon steel and wash and dry it pretty quickly after each use. No matter how well you take care of it though, carbon steel will patina over time, which I find distinguished, but it could turn into rust if you aren't careful. And this reaction is actually the same thing that's responsible for these squiggly lines of a Damascus pattern. The pattern is made by dipping a forged knife into acid to reveal the stack of alternating metal alloys that was used in its manufacturing. The more reactive alloy will darken and leave the less reactive alloy brighter in contrast. These types of knives will also be described as welded knives because welding the alternating stack of alloys together is the first step of the forging process for a Damascus knife. Because the process of making a Damascus steel knife involves welding, forging, and dipping a knife in acid, it's going to inherently be a more expensive knife. But be careful because this same effect can be made by etching or welding together lower quality steels, so just be skeptical for Damascus steel knife sets where the price is too good to be true. Test 3 takeaways. Most knives exist somewhere on this spectrum, between soft, shiny, and stainless, and hard with a patina and stained more. Now for the final test, before we see which knives can still pass the paper test. It's time for the style test. Well, less of a test because style is subjective, but there is still an important question to answer. What's the difference between Western and Eastern style chef's knives? Chef's knives, or all-purpose knives, come in a variety of different shapes, sizes, and silhouettes that each have their own strengths and weaknesses. That hopefully, after taking into account what we've already learned in the first 3 tests, knowing this will give you the confidence to be able to choose the perfect knife for you. The first knife I want to start with is the Chinese Caidao. It looks like a cleaver, but it has a tapered blade which makes it perform a lot more closely to a chef's knife. I fell in love with this shape after living in China as a Peace Corps volunteer for 2 years because it is great for making Chinese food. You know, just a stack of high vegetable slices or crushing and scooping. It really does the job. The Chinese Caidao. Now this is a Serbian cleaver, and I feel like I have to mention this because it is a type of chef's knife, but you'll mainly see it in social media with a bunch of those manly men outdoor chefs that cook next to a river on a rock with an open flame. I'm sure there are legit ones out there, but this one, which I got gifted from a pretty big name in the Serbian cleaver community, is kind of just drop-shipped garbage and the same as all the other stuff that you'll find on the internet. So if you like it, find a good one, Serbian cleaver. With those 2 styles out of the way, the most common knife styles that you'll find are Western and Japanese. Both of these are pretty similar and traditional with a classic chef's knife silhouette, but their usage and hardness is going to be where they differ. In general, a Western knife is going to have softer steel, be a little bit thicker, and have a rounded edge that makes it easier to rock and chop. You can get a harder steel in a Western silhouette. Ironically, this was also made in Japan, but just make sure you're getting the right hardness and material for your needs. Japanese knives are typically going to be made with harder steel and a bit thinner than their Western equivalent. This allows them to glide through food extra smoothly, but it leaves them a bit more fragile than the thick Western style. Japanese knives come in 2 shapes. The first is a Gyuto, which is more similar to a Western shape, with a curved base and pointed tip that is ideal for rocking and chopping. The other shape is a Santoku, which is shorter, has a flatter base, and is better for vertical chopping. For style takeaways, ultimately the knife you choose depends on how you like to cook, cut, and care for your knives. It's like buying a car. A Ford and a Ferrari will go the same speed in heavy traffic. The most important factor when choosing a knife is you. So use the info from this video to choose a knife that matches your skills, priorities, and expectations. Now let's redo the paper test and find out which of these knives still has their edge. We already know how the $4 knife did. The links to all these knives are going to be in the description, along with what I think are a summary of their strengths and weaknesses. If you liked this video, then tell YouTube by liking this video. And if you really liked it, leave a comment for the algorithm and subscribe for more.